The dining hall at Fort Bradley fell silent as Major William Crawford slammed his tray down, the metal clattering echoing off the concrete walls. His face was flushed red with anger as he glared at the woman behind the serving counter, her calm brown eyes meeting his furious gaze without flinching. "This is completely unacceptable," he shouted, his voice carrying across the mess hall where dozens of soldiers had stopped eating to watch the confrontation unfold. "I specifically requested the chicken be prepared medium well, not this overcooked disaster." The woman, Elena Salvatore, stood quietly in her kitchen whites, her graying hair pulled back in a regulation bun, weathered hands clasped behind her back in a posture that spoke of decades of military bearing. At 52, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that seemed to irritate the major even more. "Ma'am, I can prepare you a fresh portion," she said evenly, her voice betraying none of the storm brewing behind her steady gaze. "What major?" Crawford didn't know what none of them knew was that the woman he was humiliating in front of half the base had once held a rifle instead of a ladle, had commanded respect from soldiers twice his rank, and carried scars both visible and invisible from battles that had shaped the course of American military history. But Elena Salvatore had her reasons for keeping that past buried. And as she reached for a fresh piece of chicken, her fingers briefly touching the small scar on her left hand, a reminder of shrapnel from an IED in Kandahar, she wondered how much longer she could keep her silence. This is the story of how one arrogant officer's prejudice led to the most humbling moment of his military career, and how sometimes the most powerful people are hiding in plain sight. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Wyoming wind cut across Fort Bradley like a knife, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and the distant Rocky Mountains. Elena Salvatore pulled her worn duffel bag from the back of the taxi, nodding her thanks to the driver who seemed eager to leave the military installation behind. The base stretched before her, a collection of utilitarian buildings and manicured grounds that could have been any army installation in America, except for the spectacular mountain backdrop that reminded her this was as far from her previous life as she could get. "You Elena Salvatore?" The voice belonged to a stocky sergeant with kind eyes and graying temples, his name tape reading Martinez. He approached with the efficient stride of someone who'd spent decades navigating military bureaucracy. "Yes, Sergeant." "Reporting for duty." Martinez extended a calloused hand, studying her face with the practiced eye of an NCO who'd seen everything. "Welcome to Fort Bradley. I'm Sergeant Martinez, been running the mess operations here for the past 8 years. Have to say, your resume is interesting." Elena shifted her bag to her other shoulder, keeping her expression neutral. She'd spent weeks crafting that resume, carefully editing out 15 years of her life, reducing her military experience to a simple Army veteran, 2001 to 2016, honorably discharged, with no mention of rank, unit, or the reasons behind her departure. "From active duty. I'm here to cook, Sergeant." Nothing more complicated than that. Martinez nodded, though his eyes lingered on the way she carried herself, the perfect posture, the scanning gaze that automatically cataloged exits and potential threats, the unconscious habit of keeping her hands free and ready. These were tells that couldn't be erased, no matter how carefully someone tried to blend into civilian life. "Well, cooking's exactly what we need. Come on, let me show you around." They walked toward the main dining facility, a sprawling building that served nearly 3,000 personnel across 2 shifts. Elena took in the details: security cameras, guard posts, the subtle but unmistakable signs of a base on heightened alert. Fort Bradley, she knew from her research, was home to the 4th Infantry Division's Logistics Command, responsible for supply chains that stretched across 3 time zones. "You picked an interesting time to join us," Martinez said as they approached the building. "New commanding officer just took over 2 months ago." Major William Crawford, transferred in from the Pentagon. Guy's got some strong opinions about how things should be run. The way Martinez said strong opinions carried the weight of a safe soldier who'd learned to speak diplomatically about problem officers. Elena had known plenty of Crawfords in her time, officers who confused rank with leadership, who mistook loudness for strength. What kind of strong opinions? The kind that make life difficult for everyone below the rank of captain. Martinez held the door open for her. But don't worry about that now. Kitchen staff pretty much stays invisible to the brass anyway. If only he knew how wrong he was about that, Elena thought as they entered the dining hall. The familiar sounds and smells of a military mess hit her immediately. Industrial dishwashers, the clatter of serving utensils, the controlled chaos of feeding thousands of soldiers on a tight schedule. It was simultaneously foreign and deeply familiar, like returning to a house where you'd once lived, but the furniture had all been rearranged. The kitchen itself was a marvel of efficiency, gleaming stainless steel surfaces, walk-in coolers the size of small apartments, and gas ranges that could have supplied a small restaurant. A handful of cooks moved through the space with practiced efficiency, prepping for the evening meal service. "Team, we got fresh blood," Martinez announced. "Elena Salvatore, our new cook. Elena, meet the crew." The introductions were quick but warm. There was Patricia Chun, a 20-something Army spouse whose husband was deployed to Germany, her culinary school background evident in the precision of her knife work. Tommy Rodriguez, a former Navy cook who'd stayed in the area after his discharge, brought 15 years of shipboard experience and an encyclopedic knowledge of feeding people in confined spaces. Sarah Johnson, barely 19 and fresh from culinary training, watched everything with the eager attention of someone determined to prove herself. And then there was David Morrison, a 40-year-old civilian contractor whose military bearing suggested active duty past, though he'd never offered details about his service. He nodded respectfully at Elena, but she caught something in his expression, a flicker of recognition, quickly suppressed. "Elena's got Army background," Martinez explained to the group. "Figure she fit right in with our organized chaos." "What was your amos?" Morrison asked casually, using the military term for job specialty. Elena had prepared for this question. 1B Infantry. "Did my time got out, decided I wanted to do something more peaceful." It wasn't entirely a lie. She had been infantry in the beginning. What she left out was everything that came after: the Special Forces selection, the deployment to Afghanistan, the classified missions that had earned her commendations most soldiers never heard of, and the final mission that had changed everything. Grunt life to kitchen work, Rodriguez laughed. "That's definitely a change of pace. What made you want to cook?" The real answer was complicated. After leaving active duty, Elena had spent 2 years trying to find her place in the civilian world. She'd attempted college, tried working for a defense contractor, even spent 6 months as a security consultant. But nothing felt right. The transition from a life where every decision carried life or death, consequences to the mundane concerns of civilian existence, had left her feeling adrift. Cooking had started as therapy, a recommendation from the V, a counselor who'd helped her process the nightmares and survivor's guilt that followed her home from Afghanistan. There was something meditative about the precision required, the way flavors had to be balanced just right, the immediate feedback of a meal well prepared. It required the same attention to detail that had kept her alive in combat, but the stakes were different now. The worst that could happen was a disappointed diner, not a dead soldier. "Always liked feeding people," she said instead, which was also true. During her deployments, she'd been the one organizing care packages for local villages, the one making sure her soldiers got hot meals whenever possible, the one who understood that morale often started with a full stomach. "Well, you'll get plenty of practice here," Patricia said, gesturing to the prep list taped to the stainless steel counter. We serve about 1,500 for dinner service, another 1,000 for the late shift. Base is running full capacity with the new training rotations. Coming through. Elena scanned the menu, nothing fancy, but solid, fill-in food that would fuel soldiers through demanding physical training. Grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, mashed potatoes, a variety of salads and sides. The kind of meal that required good timing and organization more than culinary artistry. Speaking of which, Martinez checked his watch. Dinner service starts in 3 hours. Elena, you comfortable jumping right in? Absolutely, Sergeant. Good. Patricia, get her set up on vegetables. Elena, Patricia's our senior cook. She'll show you our systems. As Martinez headed back to his office, Patricia led Elena to a prep station equipped with industrial-grade equipment that could process vegetables for hundreds of people. So infantry, huh? Patricia said as she demonstrated the proper use of the commercial vegetable slicer. My dad was 82nd Airborne. Sod infantry was the toughest job in the Army. Elena nodded noncommittally, focusing on the machine's operation. She'd used similar equipment before, during her time running logistics for Joint Special Operations, but that was information Patricia didn't need. Must have been hard, being a woman in the infantry, Patricia continued. I mean, they only opened those positions to women a few years ago, right? It had its challenges, Elena said carefully. The truth was more complex. She'd entered the infantry when the official policy still barred women from combat roles, but reality on the ground had been different. Special operations units had been using women in direct action roles for years under various administrative arrangements. Elena had been part of that shadow world where policy and practice diverged, where capable soldiers were valued regardless of gender, and where the traditional rules didn't always apply. The afternoon flew by as Elena settled into the rhythm of large-scale food preparation. The work was physically demanding, but satisfying in a way that surprised her. There was something peaceful about the methodical process of washing, cutting, and seasoning vegetables for hundreds of people. Her knife work, refined during years of field cooking, where efficiency meant the difference between hot meals and cold MREs, quickly caught Patricia's attention. Damn, you're fast, Patricia observed as Elena moved through a case of onions with mechanical precision. Where'd you learn to cut like that? Practice, Elena replied, which was true enough. As the dinner hour approached, the kitchen's energy shifted into high gear. This was the controlled chaos Martinez had mentioned, multiple cooking surfaces running simultaneously, timers beeping, orders being called out, the precise choreography of feeding thousands of people in a limited time frame. Elena found herself falling into old patterns, automatically positioning herself to assist wherever needed, calling out timing updates, coordinating with her teammates in the seamless way that came from years of working in high-stress environments, where communication meant survival. Morrison, working the grill station next to her vegetable prep, gave her an appraising look. You've done this before. Kitchen work? Large-scale food service. The way you move, the way you anticipate what's needed next. That's not something you pick up in civilian restaurants. Elena met his gaze steadily. Army taught me to pay attention to details. Before Morrison could respond, the dining hall doors opened and the first wave of soldiers began filing in. Elena could see them through the serving window, young faces, mostly with the lean builds and confident bearing of people in peak physical condition. They moved with the easy camaraderie of soldiers who trained together, ate together, and would likely deploy together. For a moment, watching them, Elena felt a sharp pang of something she couldn't quite name. Not regret, exactly, but a recognition of the life she'd chosen to leave behind. These soldiers were part of something larger than themselves, connected to their comrades and their mission in ways that civilians struggled to understand. It was a brotherhood and increasingly sisterhood forged in shared hardship and mutual dependence. "First batch ready to go out," Patricia called, snapping Elena back to the present. The dinner service proceeded smoothly, a testament to Martinez's leadership and the team's experience. Elena's vegetables were perfectly prepared, not overcooked, properly seasoned, timed to finish exactly when the proteins came off the grill. She found herself automatically adjusting for the altitude, compensating for the way mountain air affected cooking times. Drawing on knowledge accumulated during deployments to high-altitude regions of Afghanistan. It wasn't until the second wave of diners entered that Elena got her first glimpse of Major William Crawford. He strode into the dining hall with the unmistakable bearing of an officer who expected immediate deference. Tall and lean, with perfectly pressed utilities and spit-shine boots, Crawford carried himself with the rigid posture of someone who confused military bearing with superiority. His pale blue eyes swept the room with the entitled gaze of someone accustomed to being the most important person present. Elena watched him move through the serving line, noting how the younger soldiers straightened slightly when he passed, how conversations quieted in his vicinity. This was an officer who ruled through intimidation rather than inspiration, who demanded respect rather than earning it. When Crawford reached the serving counter, Elena was plating roasted vegetables alongside Patricia's perfectly grilled chicken. She noticed how he examined each item with the critical eye of someone looking for fault, how he spoke to the serving staff with barely concealed impatience. "This chicken better be cooked properly this time," he said to Patricia, his voice carrying, just loud enough for nearby soldiers to hear. Last week's dinner was completely unacceptable. Patricia's jaw tightened, but her voice remained professional. "Yes, sir. Fresh off the grill, cooked to regulation temperature." Crawford took his tray without acknowledgement, his dismissive attitude toward the kitchen staff clear to anyone watching. Elena felt a familiar anger building in her chest, the same fury she'd felt whenever she'd witnessed officers abusing their authority, treating subordinates as less than human, but she said nothing. This wasn't her fight, not anymore. She was here to cook, to find some measure of peace in the routine of feeding people, to build a quiet life free from the complications of command and the weight of decisions that affected other people's lives. As Crawford disappeared into the dining hall, Elena returned to her vegetables, telling herself that some battles weren't worth fighting. She had no way of knowing that this was only the beginning, that Major Crawford's particular brand of arrogance would soon target her directly, and that her carefully maintained anonymity was about to become impossible to sustain. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elena's second week at Fort Bradley began with an unusual request. She arrived at 0500 for the breakfast shift to find Martinez waiting by the coffee machine, his expression more serious than usual. "Got a special assignment for you today," he said, handing her a steaming mug. "Base commander's hosting a VIP breakfast. 15 guests, including some Pentagon brass and a couple of senators on the Armed Services Committee. Major Crawford specifically requested our best people handle the service." Elena raised an eyebrow. "And you think I qualify as best people after 10 days? "I think you're the most overqualified short-order cook I've ever met," Martinez replied. Bluntly, whatever you did before this, it wasn't just slinging hash in some diner. Patricia noticed it. Morrison noticed it. Hell, even the new kid Sarah can tell you're different. Elena sipped her coffee, buying time. She'd been careful to keep her skills appropriately modest, but apparently not careful enough. "I just pay attention to details, Sergeant." "Right. Details like automatically adjusting cooking times for altitude without being told. Details like knowing proper knife safety protocols that most professional chefs don't follow. Details like organizing prep stations with the efficiency of someone who's run field kitchens under combat conditions." The silence stretched between them. Elena could deflect, make jokes, or continue the charade that she was just another veteran looking for steady work. Instead, she met Martinez's eyes directly. "Some things you don't forget," Martinez nodded slowly. "Some things you shouldn't forget, but some things you also don't need to advertise, if you know what I mean." "I do." "Good, because this VIP breakfast is important, and Major Crawford is already wound tighter than a drum about making the right impression. Last thing anyone needs is complications." The VIP breakfast was scheduled for 0800 in the base commander's private dining room, a space Elena had never seen but imagined was significantly more elegant than the main mess hall. The menu was ambitious for a military facility: eggs Benedict, fresh fruit salad, artisanal breads, and coffee that cost more per pound than most soldiers made in a day. Elena found herself assigned to eggs Benedict preparation alongside Patricia, while Morrison handled the bread service and Rodriguez managed the fruit. It was delicate work, requiring precise timing to ensure the hollandaise sauce didn't break and the poached eggs achieved the perfect consistency. "Nervous?" Patricia asked, as they began setting up their station. "Should I be? Major Crawford tends to get ... intense when VIPs are involved. Last month's Colonel's retirement dinner, he made Rodriguez remake the same batch of rolls 3 times because they weren't regulation perfect, whatever that means." Elena had dealt with perfectionist officers before, though usually in contexts where lives hung in the balance rather than military careers. "We'll manage." At 0730, Major Crawford arrived in the kitchen, his uniform so crisp it looked like it had been ironed while he was wearing it. He moved through the space like a general, inspecting troops, examining every prep station with the critical eye of someone determined to find fault. "Rodriguez, these strawberries better be perfectly uniform," he barked. "I don't want to see any variation in size or ripeness." "Yes, sir," Rodriguez replied, already sorting through fruit that looked identical to Elena's trained eye. Crawford moved to Morrison's bread station. "These croissants look store-bought." "They're from the base bakery, sir. Fresh this morning. I specifically requested artisanal breads. These look like something you'd find at a gas station." Crawford's voice carried that particular tone of disapproval that Elena remembered from officers who confused micromanagement with leadership. When he reached Elena and Patricia's station, his scrutiny intensified. Elena was in the middle of whisking hollandaise sauce, her movements smooth and confident from years of practice that predated her military service. Her grandmother had taught her the technique during summers in her kitchen, back when Elena thought her biggest challenges would involve college applications and weekend jobs. "What's your experience with eggs Benedict?" Crawford demanded. "Sufficient for the task, sir," Elena replied without looking up from her sauce. "I didn't ask for your confidence level. I asked about your experience." Elena paused her whisking and met his gaze. "I've prepared eggs Benedict in various contexts, sir, including for senior military personnel." "Various contexts?" Crawford's tone suggested he found her response inadequate. "This isn't some roadside diner cook. These are United States senators who could affect base funding with a single phone call." "Understood, sir." Crawford watched her work for several more seconds, clearly hoping to spot some technical flaw he could correct. Elena's hollandaise was perfect smooth, properly emulsified, with exactly the right balance of acid and richness. Her poached eggs, bubbling gently in perfectly maintained water, were timing out to finish exactly when needed. Finding no obvious problems, Crawford shifted his attention to Patricia, who was preparing the Canadian bacon with professional precision. "This bacon better be cooked evenly. No burnt edges, no raw spots." "Yes, sir," Patricia said through gritted teeth. "And you," Crawford turned back to Elena, "I want those eggs perfectly poached. No broken yolks, no overcooking. These VIPs are accustomed to 5-star service." Elena nodded calmly, though internally she was fighting the urge to explain that she'd once prepared breakfast for a joint task force commander in a forward operating base kitchen while incoming mortar rounds shook dust from the ceiling. If she could maintain perfect poached eggs under artillery fire, she was reasonably confident she could handle a peacetime VIP breakfast. The service began at 0800 sharp. Elena watched through the kitchen's service window as distinguished guests filed into the commander's dining room, silver-haired senators with the soft bearing of career politicians, Pentagon officials whose ribbons told stories of desk-bound careers, and a sprinkling of actual combat veterans whose presence was evident in their bearing. Crawford positioned himself near the kitchen door, monitoring every plate that went out with the intensity of a sniper watching a target. Elena's first eggs Benedict left the kitchen perfectly plated hollandaise at exactly the right consistency. Eggs with intact yolks that would break at the touch of a fork. Canadian bacon heated, but not overcooked. Acceptable, Crawford muttered. As the plate passed his inspection, the breakfast service proceeded smoothly, each course leaving the kitchen on schedule and returning empty. Elena found herself falling into old rhythms, automatically adjusting for timing variations, communicating with her teammates through glances and subtle gestures rather than words. It was the kind of seamless coordination that came from years of working in high-pressure environments where mistakes had consequences. Halfway through service, one of the senators requested a modification eggs Benedict with the hollandaise sauce on the side due to dietary restrictions. It was a simple change, but one that required quick thinking and adaptation. Elena had the modified plate ready within minutes, earning a nod of approval from the server who delivered it. Professional recovery, Morrison observed quietly. Just paying attention, Elena replied. As the breakfast concluded and guests began filtering out, Elena noticed one of the Pentagon officials, a colonel whose ribbons included combat decorations from Iraq and Afghanistan, paused near the kitchen door to speak with Crawford. "Excellent breakfast, Major," the colonel said. "Your kitchen staff clearly knows what they're doing." Crawford straightened visibly at the compliment. "Thank you, sir. I maintain very high standards for food service on this base. It shows." That hollandaise sauce was restaurant quality. "Your chef must have significant experience." Elena felt Crawford's eyes on her as she cleaned her station. "We're fortunate to have skilled personnel, sir." The colonel nodded and moved on, but Elena caught the expression on Crawford's face, a mixture of satisfaction at the compliment and irritation that he couldn't claim direct credit for the kitchen's success. It was an expression she'd seen before on officers who took credit for their subordinates' achievements while distancing themselves from any failures. After the VIPs departed and the kitchen returned to normal operations, Martinez approached Elena's station where she was breaking down equipment and beginning prep for the lunch service. "Colonel Henderson seemed impressed," he said casually. "Good to hear, Sergeant. He's not easily impressed. Spent 2 tours in Afghanistan running logistics for special operations. Knows good field cooking when he tastes it." Elena's hands stilled on the sauce pot she was scrubbing. "Is that so?" "Yeah. Mentioned to Crawford that whoever made that hollandaise had serious professional training. Said it reminded him of the quality they maintained at forward operating bases where the cooks really knew their business." Elena resumed her cleaning, keeping her expression neutral. "Just following the recipe, Sergeant." Martinez was quiet for a moment, watching her work. "Elena, I've been in the Army for 22 years. I know the difference between following a recipe and having instincts that come from experience. That colonel recognized something in your cooking that goes beyond basic training." "What are you asking, Sergeant?" "I'm not asking anything. I'm just saying that whatever your background, you're welcome here as long as you want to stay. But I'm also saying that if you ever decide you want to tell me the real story, I'm listening." Elena looked up from her cleaning, meeting Martinez's steady gaze. For a moment, she considered it, the relief of honesty, of not having to carefully edit every response, of working with people who knew and respected her actual capabilities. But honesty came with complications, and complications were exactly what she'd come to Fort Bradley to avoid. The real story is that I'm a veteran who wants to cook good food for people who serve their country, she said finally. Everything else is just details. Martinez nodded slowly. Fair enough. But Elena, that colonel wasn't wrong. You've got skills that go way beyond what most people expect from a base cook. Crawford noticed too, whether he wants to admit it or not. As Martinez walked away, Elena returned to her prep work, but her mind was churning. She'd managed to stay under the radar for exactly 2 weeks before her background started showing through the careful facade she'd constructed. If trained military personnel were noticing inconsistencies in her cover story, how long before someone started asking more pointed questions? The afternoon lunch service proceeded normally, but Elena found herself hyper-aware of Crawford's presence whenever he entered the kitchen. She caught him watching her work several times, his expression unreadable but intense. During the post-lunch cleanup, he approached her station directly. "Cook Salvatore," he said, his tone formal and slightly cold. "Yes, sir?" "Your performance this morning was adequate." Elena waited, recognizing the setup for what it was. Officers like Crawford rarely offered praise without expecting something in return. "However," Crawford continued, "I need to ensure that all my kitchen staff maintain consistent standards. I'll be implementing more regular quality inspections going forward." "Understood, sir." "Good. And Salvatore? I expect you to maintain the same level of performance for routine services that you showed for today's VIPs. No dropping standards just because the audience is less distinguished." The implication was clear. Crawford suspected her capabilities exceeded what she'd been demonstrating, and he intended to push her to prove it consistently. It was exactly the kind of attention Elena had hoped to avoid. "Of course, sir," she replied evenly. As Crawford walked away, Elena realized her quiet anonymity at Fort Bradley was already beginning to unravel. The question now was whether she could maintain her cover story long enough to figure out her next move, or whether the skills that had once saved lives would inevitably expose the truth. She was so determined to keep buried. The alarm system's piercing wail cut through the pre-dawn darkness at 0347 hours, jolting Elena from the light sleep that had become her norm since leaving active duty. Years of deployment conditioning meant she was fully alert within seconds, automatically assessing threats and calculating response times before her feet hit the floor of her small base housing unit. Emergency lights strobed outside her window as vehicles raced toward the main gate. Elena pulled on her clothes and stepped onto her front porch, where other base residents were emerging to investigate the commotion. The sound of helicopters approached from the North Medical Evacuation Birds, she realized, recognizing the distinctive rotor signature of Black Hawks, configured for casualty transport. Her phone buzzed with a text from Martinez. "Kitchen emergency activation. Report. ASAP. Mass casualty exercise turned real." Elena was dressed and moving toward the dining facility within minutes, muscle memory taking over as she fell into the controlled urgency that marked the transition from routine to crisis. As she jogged through the base, she passed convoy vehicles, loaded with medical personnel heading toward the helicopter landing zones. Whatever had happened, it was serious enough to activate the base's full emergency response protocols. The kitchen was already buzzing with controlled chaos when she arrived. Martinez stood at the center, coordinating with personnel Elena didn't recognize: medical staff, logistics coordinators, and what appeared to be Red Cross volunteers. The normal breakfast prep had been abandoned in favor of large-scale meal preparation designed to feed emergency responders and potential casualties. "Elena, thank God," Martinez called out when he spotted her. "We've got a situation. Training accident at the Mountain Warfare School, about 40 miles north." Multiple casualties, including civilians. They're flying wounded here because we've got the closest level 2 trauma center. Elena's mind immediately shifted into crisis mode, automatically calculating quantities, timing, and logistics. How many people are we feeding? Medical teams, flight crews, family members, plus normal base operations. Figure 800 to 1,000 over the next 12 hours, with timing completely unpredictable. Martinez handed her a clipboard with hastily scrawled notes. Needs simple, hot food that can be ready in batches as people arrive. Copy that. What about staffing? Patricia's en route. Rodriguez is 20 minutes out. Morrison's already here, setting up the main cooking line. Problem is Major Crawford. Elena looked up from the clipboard. What kind of problem? He showed up 15 minutes ago, took one look at the situation, and decided he needed to personally supervise emergency operations. Been countermanding our standard procedures ever since. As if summoned by their conversation, Crawford appeared from the storage area, his uniform immaculate despite the early hour and emergency circumstances. His expression carried the intense focus of someone determined to prove his leadership capabilities. Under pressure. Salvatore, he snapped, I need you on soup preparation. We're going to serve a hearty beef and vegetable soup that will demonstrate our facility's capability to provide comfort food during crisis situations. Elena blinked. Sir, with respect, soup service is complicated during mass casualty events. People come and go unpredictably, and I didn't ask for your opinion on emergency food service protocols, Crawford interrupted. I gave you an assignment. Martinez stepped forward diplomatically. Major, our standard emergency protocol calls for simple items that can be prepared quickly and served flexibly. Sandwiches, chili, items that people can eat quickly and move on. Sergeant Martinez, I'm implementing enhanced procedures to ensure we exceed expectations during this crisis. Crawford's tone brooked no argument. This is an opportunity to demonstrate exceptional capabilities, not settle for adequate responses. Elena watched this exchange with growing concern. Emergency food service wasn't about demonstrating capabilities, it was about efficiently feeding stressed, tired people who needed sustenance, not culinary theater. Crawford's approach revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of crisis priorities. Sir, she tried again, people responding to trauma situations often have difficulty with rich foods. Simple carbohydrates and proteins are usually better tolerated. Cook Salvatore. Crawford's voice carried a warning edge. Are you questioning my direct orders? The kitchen had gone quiet, other staff members watching the confrontation with obvious discomfort. Elena felt the familiar tension of military hierarchy colliding with practical necessity, a situation she'd navigated countless times in combat zones, where ego could literally get people killed. No, sir. I'm providing information based on experience with emergency food service. Your experience with emergency food service consists of 2 weeks working in this kitchen, Crawford replied coldly. My experience includes staff assignments at the Pentagon, where I've coordinated responses to national-level incidents. I think I understand emergency protocols. Elena bit back the response that threatened to escape, that her experience with emergency food service included feeding special operations teams during active combat, providing sustenance for evacuated civilians in disaster zones, and coordinating field kitchens in environments where failure meant people went hungry while under enemy fire. Instead, she nodded stiffly. Understood, sir. Beef and vegetable soup. Excellent. I want the soup ready in 90 minutes with fresh bread rolls and a selection of beverages. This needs to be restaurant quality. We're going to show these medical teams and families that Fort Bradley maintains the highest standards, even under pressure. As Crawford moved away to micromanage other aspects of the emergency response, Morrison appeared at Elena's elbow. He's going to get people sick, he muttered under his breath. Not if I can help it, Elena replied, already calculating modifications that would make Crawford's soup both palatable and appropriate for the circumstances. She began pulling ingredients for a soup that would technically meet Crawford's requirements, while actually serving the needs of people in crisis. Instead of the heavy, cream-based concoction she suspected he envisioned, she planned a lighter broth-based soup with easily digestible vegetables and lean protein. It would look impressive but be gentle on stressed digestive systems. Patricia arrived as Elena was beginning her prep work, taking in the situation with one glance. Let me guess, Crawford's making this more complicated than it needs to be. He wants restaurant-quality soup for trauma response personnel. Patricia shook her head. That man has never fed anyone who wasn't sitting at a white tablecloth. The next hour passed in intensive preparation. Elena found herself falling into old patterns, automatically organizing her workspace for maximum efficiency, timing multiple components to finish simultaneously, adjusting recipes based on available ingredients and equipment limitations. It was exactly the kind of adaptive cooking she'd done in field conditions, where improvisation was survival. Morrison, working the bread station beside her, watched her knife work with undisguised admiration. Where did you learn to brunoise vegetables that fast? Practice, Elena replied automatically, then caught herself. Her knife skills were approaching exhibition level, the kind of speed and precision that came from years of professional training, not casual home cooking. She forced herself to slow down, making her movements more deliberate and less fluid. But the damage was done. Morrison's expression suggested he'd seen enough to confirm whatever suspicions he'd been harboring about her background. At 0630, the first helicopter arrived with casualties from the training accident. Elena could see medical personnel rushing gurneys toward the hospital facility, the controlled urgency of trauma response filling the base with purpose. Family members began arriving shortly after, their faces carrying the particular strain of people waiting for news about loved ones. Crawford appeared in the kitchen doorway, surveying the preparation with the critical eye of someone looking for problems to solve. How's that soup coming, Salvatore? On schedule, sir. Ready for service in 30 minutes. Good. I want you to personally serve the soup to the first family members who arrive. Make sure they understand the level of care and attention we provide. Here, Elena paused in her stirring. Sir, wouldn't it be more appropriate for medical liaison personnel to interact with families? The food service is part of the overall care package we're providing, Crawford insisted. These people need to see that every aspect of their experience here reflects military excellence. There was something deeply wrong with Crawford's approach, treating a genuine emergency as a performance opportunity rather than focusing on actual care. Elena had seen this before in officers more concerned with their image than their mission, but rarely in situations where the consequences were so immediate. Yes, sir, she agreed, though every instinct rebelled against using traumatized families as props for Crawford's leadership theater. 20 minutes later, the first wave of family members entered the dining facility. Elena watched them through the service window, parents, spouses, and siblings wearing the hollow expressions of people whose normal world had suddenly tilted into uncertainty. They moved with the careful control of individuals trying to hold themselves together while waiting for news. Crawford positioned himself near the serving line, ready to greet families with what he clearly viewed as inspirational leadership. Elena ladled soup into bowls, noting how many people took portions they didn't really want, but accepted out of politeness or inability to make decisions under stress. Excuse me, ma'am. One of the family members, a woman in her 50s whose son was among the injured, approached Elena directly. The soup smells wonderful, but I'm not sure I can keep anything heavy down right now. Do you have anything lighter? Before Elena could respond, Crawford intervened smoothly. Mrs. Patterson, this soup was specially prepared by our most experienced cook using fresh ingredients and time-honored techniques. I think you'll find it both nourishing and comforting during this difficult time." The woman looked uncertain, clearly not wanting to offend but equally clearly not interested in rich food while her child was in surgery. Elena made a quick decision. "I can prepare some plain broth with crackers if that would be easier," she offered quietly. Crawford's expression hardened. "That won't be necessary. Our soup provides exactly the nutrition and comfort these families need." Elena met his gaze directly, recognizing the moment when military courtesy collided with human decency. In her previous life, she'd faced similar choices between following orders and doing what was right. The stakes were different now, but the principle remained the same. "Of course, sir," she said aloud. Then, catching Mrs. Patterson's eye, she mouthed silently, 5 minutes. 10 minutes later, Elena discreetly delivered a mug of clear chicken broth and a sleeve of saltines to Mrs. Patterson, who accepted them with obvious relief and gratitude. Crawford was occupied with greeting other families and didn't notice the exchange. But Morrison noticed, and Patricia noticed. And Elena realized that her careful anonymity was eroding with each decision to prioritize people over protocol, each moment when her actual training overcame her cover story's limitations. Emergency response continued for hours, but Elena knew the real crisis was just beginning. Crawford's increasing attention to her work, combined with her inability to completely suppress instincts honed by years of combat leadership, was creating a situation that would soon become impossible to navigate. 3 days after the emergency response, Elena thought the incident had been forgotten. The base had returned to normal operations, the injured soldiers were recovering, and families had gone home with their loved ones. She'd managed to keep her head down during the post-crisis debriefing, letting Martinez handle the operational review while she focused on routine prep work. She should have known Crawford wouldn't let it go. "Cook Salvatore, my office. Now, the key." Major's voice cut across the kitchen during the quiet period between lunch and dinner service. Elena looked up from the onions she was dicing, noting the formal tone and the way conversations stopped at nearby stations. "Yes, sir." Crawford's office was a shrine to his career ambitions, photos with senior officers, certificates from various military courses, and a bookshelf filled with leadership manuals that looked more decorative than functional. He gestured for Elena to sit across from his desk, then remained standing in a classic intimidation posture. "I've been reviewing the emergency response from Tuesday," he began, his pale eyes fixed on her face. "Several inconsistencies have come to my attention." Elena kept her expression neutral. "Sir?" "First, your soup preparation time was significantly faster than standard military cooking protocols would suggest possible for someone with your stated experience level." Crawford consulted a notepad. "Second, multiple witnesses observed you providing unauthorized food service to family members without proper approval. I provided broth to a woman who couldn't tolerate heavier food during a stressful situation," Elena replied carefully. "Standard humanitarian consideration." "Standard humanitarian consideration?" Crawford's tone sharpened. "That's an interesting phrase choice for a former infantry soldier turned cook. Almost sounds like language from someone familiar with emergency response protocols." Elena felt the conversation taking a dangerous turn. Crawford wasn't just challenging her actions, he was probing her background, looking for inconsistencies in her cover story. She'd encountered this kind of interrogation before, usually from intelligence officers trying to verify identities and credentials. "Sir, I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything, Salvatore. I'm stating facts." Crawford moved to the window, gazing out at the base's main thoroughfare. "Fact 1. Your technical skills exceed what someone with basic infantry experience should possess. Fact 2. Your decision-making during crisis situations suggests familiarity with command protocols. Fact 3. You demonstrate situational awareness and leadership instincts, that don't match your personnel file. Elena's mind raced through possible responses. Deny everything and risk Crawford digging deeper? Admit to some enhanced training without revealing the full scope? Or continue the charade and hope he lost interest? Sir, some people adapt quickly to new environments. Crawford turned back to face her, his smile cold and calculating. Some people do. And some people aren't who they claim to be. The silence stretched between them, Crawford clearly expecting her to crack under pressure. Elena had endured interrogations. By actual enemy combatants, she wasn't about to be broken by a desk-bound major with delusions of investigative prowess. Is there something specific you're accusing me of, sir? I'm not accusing you of anything criminal, Crawford said slowly. But I am questioning whether you've been completely honest about your qualifications and experience. This base operates on trust, Salvatore. When someone lies about their background, it undermines unit cohesion and operational security. Elena felt a flash of anger at the implication. She'd never lied about anything related to security or operations. She'd simply omitted details about her past that weren't relevant to her current position. But Crawford was twisting her desire for privacy into something suspicious and potentially treasonous. My background check was completed before I was hired, she said evenly. If there were concerns about my qualifications or security clearance, they would have been identified then. Background checks verify what people tell them to. Verify, Crawford replied. They don't necessarily catch omissions or creative editing of employment history. He moved back to his desk, pulling out a manila folder that Elena recognized with growing unease, her personnel file. Crawford opened it with theatrical precision, scanning contents she knew were carefully sanitized versions of her actual military record. Infantry Specialist, 2001 to 2016, he read aloud. Honorably discharged. Standard deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. No specialized training listed beyond basic combat skills. He looked up. Pretty sparse record for 15 years of service, don't you think? Elena's mouth went dry. Her actual military personnel file contained numerous redacted sections, classified training records, and commendations that couldn't be publicly disclosed due to operational security. What Crawford was reading was the cover version provided to employers without security clearance, accurate but deliberately incomplete. Not everyone's military service involves exciting assignments, sir. True, Crawford agreed. But everyone's military service leaves documentation. Training schools attended, units assigned to, performance evaluations, disciplinary actions, commendations received. Your file reads like someone tried to erase the interesting parts. Elena forced herself to remain calm. Crawford was fishing, hoping she'd reveal information he could use against her. The smart play was to give him nothing and wait for him to lose interest. But something in his tone suggested this wasn't casual curiosity. It was personal animosity looking for justification. Sir, if you have specific concerns about my performance or conduct, I'd appreciate you addressing them directly. My concerns are about honesty and integrity, Crawford replied sharply. Qualities that seem negotiable for you. Elena felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. Crawford's accusations were both unfair and hypocritical. He was questioning her integrity while demonstrating none himself. But losing her temper would only confirm his suspicions that she was hiding something significant. With respect, sir, I've performed every assigned duty to standard or above. My personal history before joining this kitchen doesn't affect my ability to prepare food for this base. Everything affects everything in a military environment, Crawford shot back. Your attitude during the emergency response, your technical skills, your leadership instincts, they all suggest someone with command experience who's deliberately concealing their actual qualifications. Elena stared at him, recognizing the trap he was setting. Admit to leadership experience and explain why she was working as a cook, or continue denying and risk him escalating his investigation. Either path led to unwanted scrutiny of her past. "Major Crawford," she said finally, "I'm a veteran who wanted a quiet job cooking for people who serve their country. If that somehow threatens you, maybe the problem isn't with my background." Crawford's face flushed at the implication. "Are you suggesting I feel threatened by a cook?" "I'm suggesting that competent subordinates shouldn't be treated as suspects simply for doing their jobs well." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Elena realized she'd crossed a line, challenging Crawford's authority in a way that made backing down impossible for either of them. But she was tired of being treated like a criminal for the crime of being good at her job. "Cook Salvatore," Crawford said with icy formality, "you're relieved of kitchen duties pending a comprehensive review of your personnel files and background information. Report to Sergeant Martinez for temporary assignment to administrative duties until this matter is resolved." Elena stood slowly, recognizing the punishment for what it was: banishment from the kitchen and productive work, while Crawford tried to find evidence to support his suspicions. It was petty retaliation disguised as legitimate investigation. "Yes, sir. And Salvatore? I'd advise you to consider whether continued employment here is really in your best interests. People with secrets often find military environments uncomfortable." Elena turned toward the door, then paused. For a moment, she considered telling Crawford exactly who he was talking to, laying out her actual service record, her commendations, the missions that had saved American lives and advanced national security interests. The urge to put this arrogant, small-minded officer in his place was almost overwhelming. Instead, she simply nodded. "Understood, sir." As she left Crawford's office, Elena felt the weight of a decision she'd been avoiding since arriving at Fort Bradley. She could continue this charade, accept whatever punishment Crawford devised, and hope he eventually lost interest. Or she could stop running from her past and deal with the consequences of being who she really was. The problem was that being who she really was came with complications she wasn't sure she was ready to handle. The Medal of Honor wasn't just an award, it was a responsibility, a symbol that carried expectations and obligations. She'd been trying to escape. Walking back toward the kitchen to collect her belongings, Elena passed a group of young soldiers heading to evening chow. They moved with the confident bearing of people who believed in their mission and trusted their leadership. Looking at them, she remembered why she'd served, why she'd accepted missions that nearly killed her, why she'd earned recognition she sometimes wished she could forget. Maybe it was time to stop hiding from that responsibility. Maybe Crawford's investigation would force her to confront the truth. She'd been avoiding that some things were more important than personal peace, and some battles were worth fighting regardless of the cost. But first, she had to figure out how to survive whatever Crawford had planned for her next. And based on the expression she'd seen on his face, that wasn't going to be easy. Administrative duty at Fort Bradley meant sorting supply invoices in a windowless office that smelled of stale coffee and bureaucratic frustration. Elena sat at a metal desk that had probably been manufactured during the Carter administration, methodically entering data into spreadsheets while Crawford's investigation ground forward with the efficiency of government machinery. For 3 days, she'd watched Martinez's increasingly frustrated attempts to run kitchen operations without his most capable cook. Patricia was handling the additional workload professionally, but the stress was showing. Rodriguez had burned 2 batches of bread, and young Sarah was making basic mistakes under pressure. The whole operation was suffering because Crawford couldn't tolerate the possibility that someone might be more competent than he expected. Elena was reconciling a particularly confusing invoice for industrial-grade flour when Morrison appeared in her doorway, looking around nervously before stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. Elena saved her work and leaned back in her chair. "About what?" Morrison moved to the single visitor chair, his movements carrying the controlled tension of someone about to share classified information. About who you really are. Elena felt her stomach tighten. I'm not sure what you mean. Cut the act, Elena. I know exactly what you mean. Morrison leaned forward, lowering his voice despite the closed door. I've been watching you since day one, and everything about you screams special operations. The way you move, the way you think, the way you handle crisis situations. I've worked with enough operators to recognize the signs. Elena studied Morrison's face, noting the certainty in his expression. Denying would be pointless now, but confirming could create new problems. That's quite an assumption, she said carefully. It's not an assumption. Morrison reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I did some research. Called in a few favors with friends who have access to databases that Crawford doesn't know exist. Elena's pulse quickened. Morrison, I'd be very careful about Staff Sergeant Elena Salvatore. 1st Special Forces Group, Morrison interrupted. Reading from the paper. 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan. Bronze Star with V-device for valor under fire. Purple Heart. Army Commendation Medal with oak leaf cluster. Elena's mouth went dry. Morrison had accessed classified military records information that should have been compartmentalized and protected from casual inquiry. The implications were staggering. That's not all, Morrison continued. Operation Red Dawn, 2014. Joint Special Operations Task Force. Classified mission that resulted in the rescue of American hostages from Taliban commanders in Helmand Province. Elena stood abruptly, moving to the window despite its view of nothing but another administrative building. Morrison, you need to stop talking, right now. Why? Because it gets better. Morrison's voice carried a mixture of admiration and anger. Medal of Honor recipient, awarded for extraordinary heroism during that hostage rescue. Officially, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her life above and beyond the call of duty. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of memories she'd spent months trying to suppress. Operation Red Dawn had been a nightmare from start to finish. Intelligence failures, equipment malfunctions, and enemy contact that turned a surgical extraction into a running firefight through mountain terrain. 3 American contractors and 2 embassy personnel had been held in a compound that was supposed to be lightly defended. Instead, it had been a trap. You don't know what you're talking about, she said quietly. I know you went into that compound alone after your team took casualties, Morrison replied, his voice softer now. I know you held off 30 Taliban fighters for 6 hours while evacuating 5 hostages and 3 wounded team members. I know you were shot twice and still carried a wounded Marine to the extraction zone. Elena turned back to face him, seeing respect and understanding in his expression rather than the curiosity or judgment she'd expected. How do you know all that? Because I was there, Morrison said simply. Not in your unit, but part of the quick reaction force that responded when your mission went sideways. I was a Navy SEAL, operating out of Bagram. We got the call that a Special Forces team was in trouble and needed immediate support. Elena stared at him, pieces falling into place. Morrison's military bearing, his deference to her skills, his protective attitude during kitchen operations, he'd known from the beginning, or at least suspected. You were QRF. Second wave. By the time we reached your position, you'd already extracted the hostages and most of your team. We found you about half a mile from the compound, unconscious from blood loss, still guarding 3 wounded soldiers who wouldn't leave without you. Elena sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the sudden convergence of past and present. She'd spent months trying to escape the shadow of that mission, the weight of recognition she'd never sought, the obligations that came with being held up as a symbol of military heroism. Why didn't you say anything before? Because it was obvious you didn't want to be recognized, Morrison replied. After what you went through, after losing team members in that operation, I figured you'd earned the right to disappear if that's what you needed. Elena was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of Morrison's knowledge. Who else knows? Nobody from me. But Crawford's investigation is getting closer to the truth. He's been making calls, asking questions, and eventually someone's going to connect the dots, especially if he keeps pushing. Elena felt the walls closing in around her carefully constructed anonymity. Crawford's vendetta was about to expose not just her identity, but potentially compromise the operational security of classified missions she participated in. What's he found so far? Morrison consulted his notes. Your discharge date doesn't match your stated service period. There's a gap in your employment history that corresponds exactly to a classified assignment period. And your security clearance level is way above what a basic infantry soldier would have needed. Elena cursed silently. She'd been careful editing her service record, but Crawford was apparently more thorough than she'd given him credit for. How long before he puts it together? Could be days, could be weeks. Depends on who he knows and how persistent he is. Morrison leaned forward. But Elena, there's something else you need to know. Crawford isn't just investigating you out of curiosity or wounded pride. What do you mean? I mean he's been talking to people off base. Journalists, political contacts, people who might be interested in a story about a Medal of Honor recipient working as a cook in a base kitchen. Elena felt cold dread settling in her stomach. Media attention was exactly what she'd come to Fort Bradley to avoid. The Medal of Honor made her a public figure whether she wanted to be or not, and Crawford was apparently planning to use that against her. He wouldn't. He would, and he's probably going to, Morrison said grimly. Crawford sees this as an opportunity to boost his own profile. Dedicated officer exposes decorated war hero's deception, plays well for someone looking to advance his career. Elena stared at the invoices scattered across her desk, seeing her quiet life at Fort Bradley crumbling around her. Crawford wasn't just trying to discredit her. He was planning to destroy the anonymity she'd fought so hard to achieve. There's more, Morrison continued reluctantly. Word is spreading among the staff. People are asking questions about why you're stuck in administrative duty when the kitchen obviously needs you. Martinez is furious but can't do anything without challenging Crawford directly. Elena stood and began pacing the small office, her mind racing through options. She could quit, disappear again, try to rebuild somewhere else under a different identity. But running would validate Crawford's accusations and potentially create bigger problems if military investigators decided to track her down. Alternatively, she could stay and fight, but that meant accepting the public recognition she'd spent months avoiding. It meant becoming Elena Salvatore, Medal of Honor recipient, again instead of just Elena Salvatore, cook. What would you do? She asked Morrison. Morrison was quiet for a moment, considering. In your position, I'd stop giving Crawford the power to define the narrative. Right now, he's controlling the story because you're letting him. But if you came forward on your own terms, explained why you're here and what you're trying to accomplish, it changes everything. I came here to escape all that. I know. But sometimes the things we're running from catch up anyway. And when they do, it's better to face them standing up than to get run over while hiding. Elena stopped pacing and looked at Morrison directly. If I do this, if I stop hiding, I need to know you'll have my back. Morrison stood and extended his hand. Elena, it would be an honor to serve alongside you again. Even in a kitchen. Elena shook his hand, feeling the weight of decision settling around her. Crawford's investigation had forced her hand, but maybe Morrison was right. Maybe it was time to stop running from who she was and start fighting for who she wanted to become. All right, she said finally, but we do this smart. I'm not going to let Crawford turn this into a circus for his own benefit. Morrison smiled. Copy that. What's the plan? Elena looked out the window at the base beyond, seeing soldiers going about their daily routines. unaware that their quiet cook was about to become the center of a storm that would change everything. First, we figure out exactly what Crawford knows and when he plans to use it. Then we decide how to control the revelation before he does. She paused, feeling the familiar weight of command responsibility settling back onto her shoulders. And then we remind Major Crawford that some battles aren't worth starting, especially when you don't know who you're really fighting. Elena's opportunity came sooner than expected, in the form of an unscheduled inspection by Colonel James Harrison, the base commander. Word spread through Fort Bradley like wildfire. The old man was making surprise visits to various departments, evaluating operations with the kind of attention that made seasoned NCOs nervous and junior officers panic. Martinez found Elena in the administrative office at 1400 hours, his expression grim. Colonel's coming to inspect the dining facility at 1500. Crawford's in full crisis mode, demanding everything be perfect for when Harrison arrives. Elena looked up from her paperwork, and our kitchen operations are barely holding together. Without you. Patricia's doing her best, but Rodriguez burned another batch of rolls this morning. And Sarah's so nervous she's making mistakes on basic prep work. Martinez paused. Crawford's insisting the colonel see only properly qualified personnel during the inspection. Elena understood the implication. Crawford planned to hide the kitchen's current problems and take credit for past successes, while keeping Elena away from any interaction with the base commander. It was exactly the kind of political maneuvering that prioritized appearance over substance. "What's the colonel like?" Elena asked. Martinez's expression softened slightly. "Old school, but fair. Came up through the ranks, did 3 tours in Iraq. Doesn't suffer fools, but he respects competence when he sees it." He paused. "Word is he's not entirely happy with how Crawford's been running operations since he arrived." Elena made a decision that surprised even her. "Martinez, what if I accidentally ran into the colonel during his inspection?" Hypothetically speaking, Martinez studied her face carefully. Hypothetically, that would probably violate Crawford's direct orders to stay away from the inspection. Hypothetically. Also hypothetically, I might be in the motor pool checking on supply deliveries when that accidental meeting occurred. Martinez replied slowly. "Wouldn't want to interfere with chance encounters." Elena stood and straightened her uniform. "I think I need some fresh air. Maybe a walk around the base to clear my head." "Good idea." Hypothetically. At 1458 hours, Elena positioned herself near the dining facility's main entrance, timing her arrival to coincide with Colonel Harrison's inspection tour. She could see Crawford inside, gesturing animatedly while explaining kitchen operations to the colonel and his aide. A young captain who took notes on everything. Colonel Harrison was exactly what Elena expected from Martinez's description: average height but commanding presence, gray hair cropped close, and the kind of weathered face that came from years of making hard decisions under pressure. His uniform carried the ribbons of someone who'd earned his position through service rather than politics. Elena waited until the inspection party emerged from the building, then approached from the direction of the motor pool, as if returning from legitimate business. "Excuse me, sir," she said, addressing the colonel directly while ignoring Crawford's suddenly frozen expression. "Colonel Harrison? I'm Elena Salvatore, one of the kitchen staff. I wanted to thank you for visiting our facility." Crawford stepped forward quickly. "Colonel, this is just one of our support personnel. Nothing that requires your attention." But Colonel Harrison was studying Elena with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent decades evaluating soldiers. He noted her bearing, her direct eye contact, the way she carried herself with quiet confidence despite Crawford's obvious displeasure. "Kitchen staff, you said?" Harrison's voice carried the gravelly tone of a career soldier. "What's your position here, Salvatore?" "Cook, sir. Though I've been temporarily assigned to administrative duties." "Administrative duties? Harrison glanced at Crawford. Why would you pull an experienced cook from kitchen operations for paperwork? Crawford's face flushed slightly. Personnel. Reassignment based on operational requirements, sir. Nothing that affects our capabilities. Elena saw her opening. With respect, sir, I'd be happy to answer any questions about kitchen operations if you're interested. I've noticed some areas where we might improve efficiency. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Crawford's expression promised serious consequences for Elena's insubordination, but Colonel Harrison looked intrigued. Improve efficiency how? Elena had 30 seconds to make her case before Crawford found a way to shut down the conversation. She chose her words carefully, drawing on years of experience presenting operational assessments to senior leadership. Sir, current meal preparation procedures could be streamlined to reduce waste and improve nutritional value while maintaining cost-effectiveness. I've identified several bottlenecks in our supply chain management and prep scheduling that could increase our capacity by approximately 15%. Harrison's eyebrows rose. 15%? That's significant. What's your background, Salvatore? Crawford interjected quickly. Sir, Cook Salvatore is relatively new to our operations. Perhaps we should focus on proven procedures rather than theoretical improvements. I asked her, Major, Harrison said mildly, but with enough steel in his voice to make Crawford step back. Salvatore. Elena felt the moment crystallizing around her. She could give a sanitized version of her background and hope Harrison lost interest. Or she could provide enough truth to establish her credibility while maintaining operational security. 15 years Army experience, sir. Multiple deployments. I've run field kitchens in various environments, including logistics support for specialized units. Specialized units? Elena met Harrison's gaze directly. Special Operations Support. Sir, Joint Task Force operations in Afghanistan. The colonel's expression sharpened with professional interest. Elena could see him processing the implications. Special Operations Logistics required personnel with security clearances, advanced training, and the ability to operate under extreme conditions. It wasn't a position given to random cooks. And you're working in our base kitchen because I wanted to continue serving, sir, but in a capacity that didn't require the same operational tempo as my previous assignments. Harrison nodded, slowly, understanding the unspoken subtext. Combat veterans often sought quieter positions after intensive deployments, but their skills and experience remained valuable assets. Major Crawford, Harrison said, turning to address the increasingly uncomfortable officer, help me understand why someone with special operations logistics experience is doing administrative work instead of improving our food service operations. Crawford scrambled for an explanation that wouldn't reveal his personal vendetta. Sir, we're conducting a comprehensive review of all personnel assignments to ensure optimal utilization of resources. Comprehensive review, Harrison repeated flatly. How long does this review typically take? Ongoing process, sir. Difficult to establish specific timelines. Harrison looked back at Elena. Salvatore, in your opinion, how long should it take to determine whether an experienced cook belongs in the kitchen? Elena felt the trap Crawford had laid for himself beginning to close. Sir, in my experience, competency assessments can usually be completed within a few days of observation. Extended reviews are typically only necessary when there are specific performance or security concerns. Are there specific performance or security concerns with Cook Salvatore? Harrison asked Crawford directly. Crawford's hesitation lasted just long enough to be noticeable. Sir, the review is standard procedure for all new personnel. Standard procedure, Harrison mused. Captain Rodriguez, he addressed his aide. Make a note that I want to see our personnel review procedures for new kitchen staff. Seems like we might be overcomplicating things. Elena could see Crawford realizing that his investigation was about to be scrutinized by someone with actual authority. The colonel's questions were exposing the arbitrary nature of Elena's administrative assignment and the lack of legitimate justification for removing her from kitchen duties. "Sir," Crawford tried again, "I can provide you with detailed documentation of our review process." "I'm sure you can," Harrison replied. "But right now, I'm more interested in hearing Salvatore's ideas for improving efficiency. Walk me through these bottlenecks you mentioned." For the next 15 minutes, Elena outlined specific improvements based on her experience managing logistics for high-tempo operations. She discussed inventory management, prep scheduling optimization, cross-training, protocols, and waste reduction strategies. Her recommendations were detailed, practical, and demonstrated understanding of both large-scale food service and military operational requirements. Harrison listened intently, asking pointed questions that revealed his own familiarity with logistics. Challenges. Crawford stood silently, watching his narrative about Elena's incompetence crumble under the weight of her obvious expertise. "Impressive analysis," Harrison said when Elena finished. "These recommendations show real understanding of operational efficiency principles. Major Crawford, I'd like to see these suggestions implemented on a trial basis." "Sir, that would require reassigning Cook Salvatore back to active kitchen duties." "Yes, it would." Harrison's tone suggested this was obvious. "Is there some reason that would be problematic?" Crawford found himself trapped between admitting his investigation was baseless or continuing to defend an increasingly indefensible position. "No, sir, no problems." "Excellent. Salvatore, report to Sergeant Martinez tomorrow morning. I want to see how these efficiency improvements work in practice." Harrison paused, studying Elena's face more carefully. "And Salvatore? Your experience with special operations logistics. That's not something we see every day in a base kitchen." "No, sir. Good to have that level of expertise on the team." Harrison's expression suggested he understood there was more to Elena's story than she was sharing, but he respected her privacy. "Carry on." As the colonel's inspection party moved on to their next stop, Crawford turned to Elena with barely controlled fury. "This isn't over, Salvatore." "Yes, sir," Elena replied calmly. "I wouldn't expect it to be." But as she watched Crawford storm away, Elena realized the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Harrison's intervention had neutralized Crawford's ability to sideline her arbitrarily, but it had also put her back in the spotlight she'd been trying to avoid. Morrison appeared at her elbow as the inspection party disappeared around the corner. "Well played," he said quietly. "But you know Crawford's going to escalate now." Elena nodded, feeling the familiar weight of impending conflict. "Let him. I'm tired of running." The question now wasn't whether Crawford would discover her secret, but how she would control the revelation when it came. Elena Salvatore, Medal of Honor recipient, was about to return to public life whether she wanted to or not. The kitchen felt different when Elena returned the next morning. Patricia's face lit up with genuine relief. Rodriguez clapped her on the shoulder, and even young Sarah seemed to stand straighter, knowing that competent leadership was back. But the celebration was subdued. Everyone understood that Crawford's forced retreat didn't mean surrender. "Thank God you're back," Patricia said as they began morning prep. "Yesterday was a disaster. We had 3 orders sent back, ran out of vegetables for the evening service, and Crawford spent the whole day micromanaging every move we made." Elena tied her apron and surveyed the kitchen with fresh eyes, immediately spotting the inefficiencies that had developed during her absence. Prep stations were poorly organized, timing was off, and the entire operation lacked the smooth coordination that came from experienced leadership. "We'll fix it," she said simply, then began the process of restoring order to chaos. Within 2 hours, the transformation was obvious. Elena had repositioned equipment for better workflow, reorganized prep schedules to eliminate bottlenecks, and implemented cross-training protocols that allowed team members to support each other during busy periods. It was the kind of systematic improvement that came from years of optimizing operations under pressure. Martinez watched from the doorway, shaking his head in amazement. I should have fought harder to keep you here. This place runs like clockwork when you're in charge. I'm not in charge, Elena corrected. I'm just trying to help the team function better. Right, Martinez said with a knowing smile. Just like you were just helping when you reorganized our entire supply chain ordering system last week. Elena was preparing lunch service when Morrison approached with news that made her blood run cold. Crawford's made his move, he said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. Called a friend at the Mountain West Tribune this morning. Reporters coming to the base tomorrow. Elena's knife stilled on the cutting board. What kind of reporter? Military affairs correspondent. Name's Jennifer Walsh. Crawford apparently told her he has a story about a decorated veteran who's been hiding her identity while working in base support services. Elena felt the familiar tightness in her chest that preceded combat operations. The media attention she'd spent months avoiding was about to arrive whether she wanted it or not. Crawford had forced her hand completely. How long do we have? Walsh is driving up from Denver tonight. She'll be here for the breakfast service tomorrow. Wants to observe normal operations and conduct interviews. Morrison paused. Crawford's planning to spring the revelation on you publicly, probably in front of other staff and the reporter. Elena set down her knife and turned to face Morrison directly. He wants maximum humiliation. He wants maximum impact. Crawford sees this as his big break, the story that gets him noticed by Pentagon leadership. Dedicated officer exposes Medal of Honor recipient's deception, plays into every narrative about integrity and accountability. Elena was quiet for a moment, calculating options. She could call in sick, disappear before the reporter arrived, and force Crawford to explain her absence. But running would validate his accusations and potentially create a bigger story when the truth eventually emerged. Alternatively, she could stay and let Crawford control the narrative, accepting whatever damage he inflicted in hopes of minimizing long-term consequences. But that meant surrendering all agency over her own story. There's a third option, Morrison said, reading her thoughts. Get ahead of the story. Contact Walsh yourself. Explain why you're here on your own terms. Elena considered this, recognizing both the opportunity and the risk. Controlling the narrative meant accepting public attention, but it also meant ensuring accuracy instead of letting Crawford's version become the official record. What do you know about this Walsh? Good reputation, fair reporting, specializes in veteran issues. She's written sympathetically about PTSD, transition challenges, military families. Morrison pulled out his phone. One found some of her articles. She's not looking for gotcha journalism, she wants human interest stories. Elena made her decision with the same clarity that had served her in combat. When facing inevitable conflict, initiative was usually better than reaction. Set up a meeting. Tonight, after service. Somewhere private where we can talk without Crawford's interference. Morrison nodded. I'll make the call. The rest of the day passed in tense preparation. Elena continued her normal duties, implementing efficiency improvements while mentally rehearsing how to explain her presence at Fort Bradley without revealing classified operational details. It was going to be a delicate balance between honesty and security requirements. At 1900 hours, Elena met Jennifer Walsh at a small coffee shop just outside the base gates. Walsh was younger than expected, early 30s, with the alert eyes of someone accustomed to interviewing people who didn't want to talk. She carried herself with professional confidence, but without the aggressive edge Elena had feared. Miss Salvatore, Walsh said as they settled into a corner booth. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I have to admit, your call surprised me. Major Crawford led me to believe you'd be reluctant to discuss your background. Elena studied Walsh's face, looking for signs of bias or predetermined narrative. Major Crawford doesn't speak for me. What exactly did he tell you? Walsh consulted her. Notes that you've been working as a cook here for several weeks under false pretenses. That your military record contains significant omissions. That you've been concealing qualifications and experience that would make you eligible for much higher level positions. And what story do you think that tells? Walsh leaned forward slightly. Honestly, I'm not sure. Crawford seems to think it's about deception and integrity issues. But in my experience, when decorated veterans take jobs they're overqualified for, there's usually a more complicated explanation. Elena felt some of her tension ease. Walsh was approaching this as a journalist rather than an advocate for Crawford's position. What would you like to know? Start with the basics. Your actual military background, why you're here, what Crawford got right, and what he got wrong. Elena took a deep breath, then began the story she'd been avoiding for months. She explained her Special Forces background, the missions in Afghanistan, the circumstances that led to her Medal of Honor. She described the weight of public recognition, the expectations that came with being held up as a symbol, the difficulty of transitioning from classified operations to civilian life. I came to Fort Bradley because I wanted to serve without being Elena Salvatore, Medal of Honor recipient, she explained. I wanted to be just Elena, someone who could cook good food for soldiers and find some peace in work that mattered, but didn't require life or death decisions. Walsh took notes steadily, asking clarifying questions that showed she understood both military culture and the challenges facing modern veterans, and Crawford's accusations about deception. I never lied about anything relevant to my job performance or security clearance. I omitted details about my background because those details weren't necessary for cooking in a base kitchen, and because I was trying to build a life that wasn't defined by one mission from my past, even a mission that earned you the nation's highest military honor. Elena was quiet for a moment, wrestling with emotions she'd kept buried since leaving active duty. Especially that mission. The Medal of Honor represents the worst day of my military career, the day we lost good soldiers, the day I had to make choices no one should have to make. Yes, we saved hostages and completed the mission. But 3 members of my team didn't come home. Walsh stopped taking notes, recognizing the weight of what Elena was sharing. Survivor's guilt, among other things. The medal is important, and I'm proud of what we accomplished. But it's also a reminder of costs I wish we hadn't had to pay. They talked for another hour, Walsh asking thoughtful questions about military service, veteran transition challenges, and the gap between public perception and personal reality for decorated service members. Elena found herself opening up more than she'd planned, sharing insights about military culture and post-service identity that she'd never articulated before. One more question, Walsh said as they prepared to leave. What happens tomorrow when Crawford tries to expose you publicly? Elena met her gaze directly. Tomorrow I stop hiding. Not because Crawford forces me to, but because running from who you are eventually becomes more exhausting than accepting it. Walsh smiled. That sounds like a good headline. Just make sure you get the story right, Elena replied. Because after Dakota, tomorrow there's no going back to being anonymous. As Elena drove back to base, she felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. In less than 12 hours, her carefully constructed quiet life would be over. But for the first time since arriving at Fort Bradley, she felt like she was facing the future on her own terms, rather than reacting to Crawford's manipulations. The battle for control of her narrative was about to begin, and Elena Salvatore was finally ready to fight it. The morning of reckoning arrived with Fort Bradley's typical mountain clarity, crisp air, brilliant sunshine, and the kind of visibility that made hiding impossible. Elena arrived at the kitchen an hour earlier than usual. Not from nervousness, but from a soldier's instinct to control the battlefield before the enemy arrived. Jennifer Walsh was already waiting in the dining hall, nursing coffee and observing the breakfast service setup with a journalist's practiced eye. She caught Elena's attention through the service window and nodded slightly, a signal that she was ready to support Elena's version of events when Crawford made his move. "You're here early," Patricia observed as Elena began her prep work with mechanical precision. "Wanted to make sure everything's perfect today," Elena replied, though they both knew her definition of perfect had nothing to do with food preparation that Crawford arrived at precisely 0800, dressed in his most pristine uniform and wearing the expression of someone about to deliver a killing blow. He'd brought additional witnesses, two junior officers Elena didn't recognize and a sergeant major whose presence suggested this was being treated as an official incident rather than routine kitchen operations. "Ladies and gentlemen," Crawford announced to the kitchen staff and dining hall personnel, his voice carrying the theatrical quality of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. "We have a distinguished visitor today, Miss Jennifer Walsh from the Mountain West Tribune is here to observe our operations and meet our staff." Elena continued her work, waiting for Crawford to reveal his hand. She could feel the tension building among her teammates, all of whom understood something significant was about to happen. "Ms. Walsh," Crawford continued, "I'd like you to meet our kitchen staff. This is Sergeant Martinez, our NCOIC, Patricia Chun, our senior cook, and this," he paused dramatically, "is Elena Salvatore, who has some interesting stories to tell about her background." Walsh stepped forward professionally. "Ms. Salvatore, Major Crawford mentioned you have extensive military experience. Would you mind sharing some details about your service?" Elena set down her knife and faced the assembled group, recognizing the moment of truth she'd been avoiding for months. Crawford's expression showed barely contained satisfaction. He believed he was about to expose her deception in front of witnesses and media. "My name is Elena Salvatore," she began, her voice carrying the clear authority that had once commanded special operations teams in combat zones. "I served 15 years in the United States Army, with 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan." Crawford stepped forward, clearly expecting her to stop there. "What Ms. Salvatore isn't telling you is that her personnel file contains significant discrepancies. Her stated experience doesn't match her demonstrated capabilities, and she's been deliberately concealing." "Major Crawford," Elena interrupted, her tone respectful but firm, "I can speak for myself." The kitchen went completely silent. Elena had just publicly challenged a superior officer's authority, a violation of military protocol that could have serious consequences. But her bearing suggested someone accustomed to command rather than subordination. "I served with the 1st Special Forces Group," Elena continued, looking directly at Walsh. "My final assignment was with a Joint Special Operations Task Force conducting classified missions in eastern Afghanistan. On October 15, 2014, my team was assigned to extract 5 American hostages from the Taliban compound in Helmand Province." Crawford's face went white as he realized Elena wasn't being exposed. She was revealing herself on her own terms. "The mission went wrong from the beginning," Elena said, her voice steady despite the weight of memories she was sharing. "Intelligence failures, equipment malfunctions, and heavier enemy resistance than expected. We took casualties during the initial assault, leaving me and 2 wounded team members to complete the extraction." Martinez stepped closer, recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Patricia had stopped working entirely, focused on Elena's words. "I held the extraction site for 6 hours while evacuating 5 hostages and 3 wounded soldiers. I was shot twice during the firefight, but continued operations until all personnel were safely extracted." Elena paused, meeting Crawford's shocked gaze. "For those actions, I was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Obama in 2015. The silence that followed was profound. Rodriguez dropped a ladle, the clatter echoing through the frozen kitchen. Sarah stared with obvious awe. Even the junior officers Crawford had brought as witnesses looked stunned. Walsh broke the silence with professional composure. Medal of Honor recipient Elena Salvatore. Why are you working as a cook in a base kitchen? Elena smiled slightly, finally able to tell her story without shame or concealment. Because after 15 years of making life-and-death decisions, I wanted to do something that brought people comfort instead of requiring violence. Cooking feeds people, brings them together, creates something positive. After everything I've seen and done, that seemed like a worthwhile way to continue serving. Crawford found his voice, though it lacked its usual authority. But you deceived everyone about your qualifications. You let people believe you were just a basic infantry veteran. Elena turned to face him directly, and for the first time since arriving at Fort Bradley, she allowed her full presence to show the confidence, authority, and command presence that had once led elite soldiers in the world's most dangerous environments. Major Crawford, I never lied about anything relevant to my position. I chose not to advertise my background because I wanted to be valued for my current contributions, not my past achievements. Her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had earned respect through action rather than demanding it through rank. But you've been working below your capabilities, accepting assignments beneath your qualifications. I've been working exactly where I wanted to work. Elena interrupted. Again. The fact that you couldn't recognize competence without a medal attached to it says more about your leadership than my integrity. Colonel Harrison chose that moment to enter the dining hall, apparently drawn by reports of unusual activity. He took in the scene, Crawford looking flustered, the kitchen staff watching in fascination, Walsh taking notes, and Elena standing with the bearing of someone who belonged in command. What's going on here? Harrison asked. Walsh stepped forward. Colonel, I'm Jennifer Walsh from the Mountain West Tribune. I'm here to interview Medal of Honor recipient Elena Salvatore about her transition to civilian support roles. Harrison's eyebrows rose, but his expression showed understanding rather than surprise. Medal of Honor recipient. I thought there was more to your story, Salvatore. Crawford attempted to regain control of the situation. Sir, this raises serious questions about personnel screening and Major Crawford, Harrison said quietly, his tone carrying unmistakable authority. Perhaps you should step outside with me for a moment. As Crawford was led away, clearly about to receive a private counseling session that would define the rest of his military career, Elena found herself surrounded by colleagues who were seeing her clearly for the first time. Holy shit, Rodriguez whispered, then caught himself. Sorry, ma'am, I mean ... Medal of Honor? Elena laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. I'm still just Elena. I still want to cook good food for good people. That hasn't changed. Martinez stepped forward and saluted, not the perfunctory gesture demanded by military protocol, but the kind of salute reserved for someone who had genuinely earned respect. It's an honor to serve with you, Chef. The honor's mine, Sergeant. Walsh approached as the group began to disperse back to work. That was quite a revelation. Mind if I ask what's next for you? Elena looked around the kitchen that had become her sanctuary, then out at the base where she'd finally found a way to serve that brought peace instead of nightmares. Next, I make sure lunch service runs smoothly. Then I go home, sleep well for the first time in months, and come back tomorrow to do it again. She smiled. Turns out you can't run from who you are forever. But you can choose how to use who you are to make things better. 3 weeks later, Elena stood in the same kitchen, but everything had changed. The story Walsh had written was picked up nationally, becoming a powerful narrative about veteran transition, service after service, and finding purpose beyond recognition. The kitchen had become a model program, with Elena's efficiency improvements being studied for implementation across military installations. Crawford had been quietly transferred to a desk job in logistics, a position that matched his actual capabilities while removing him from leadership roles he wasn't suited for. Colonel Harrison had personally apologized for allowing the situation to escalate and offered Elena any position on the base she wanted. She'd chosen to stay exactly where she was. Martinez approached as she finished the lunch prep, carrying an official-looking envelope. "This came for you from Washington." Elena opened it to find an invitation to speak at the Pentagon about veteran transition programs, signed by the Secretary of Defense. She smiled and filed it with similar invitations. She'd been receiving all opportunities to use her experience to help other veterans find their way home from war, but that was for later. Right now, she had soldiers to feed, a team to lead, and a quiet life to live on her own terms. Elena Salvatore, Medal of Honor recipient, had finally learned that the greatest victory wasn't in hiding from who you are, but in choosing how to use who you are to serve others. And sometimes, the most powerful way to serve was simply to cook a good meal for people who needed it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.